Can I ask the panelists up? This is the role of business in protecting and restoring biodiversity and ecosystems. And I'm delighted to have on the panel the President of the Republic of Guyana and a Champion of the Earth 2010. Are you with us, President? Right, okay. Ashok Khosla, are you with us? President, Club of Rome and IUCN. Fantastic. And Ravi Sharma, Director at the Convention on Biological Diversity in Montreal.
We've just been told that there's a change. We're having Jonathan Kaladin.
Ah, we're having Jonathan Kaladin. And where's he from?
I haven't been told.
Okay, he's from a company called I Haven't Been Told. Okay. We'll have him up there anyway. Maybe I can just make a few introductory remarks. It was interesting about protecting the web of life, which Wangari was talking about. I think it was the famous biologist E.O. Wilson from the US who was asked about insects and maybe asked about some of the pollinators and the fact they were disappearing. And he said, well, you know, the insects don't actually need us, we need them. And then went on to point out that the world would do rather well without human beings on it. And in fact, the only extinction we would get would be 3 kinds of head and human body lice that would go extinct if human beings disappeared off the planet. All the rest of biodiversity would do rather well. The big question is, you know, we've been talking about the challenge of biodiversity and ecosystem services for years upon years upon years. And every year we learn of some new species that's become extinct. Every year we hear more and more dramatic information about the world's fisheries. It seems that they continue to go down. And so we kind of know a lot of the science and we know a lot of the reality of this. And the question is why we can't change things around. Climate change may be a little different. We may have a response to climate change in part in the pipeline. But it seems that when it comes to the natural world, our natural assets, that we seem to have been operating a mining operation on planet Earth, and we seem to continue to do so without, there are obviously notable exceptions. I mean, one thing that certainly a lot of experts and economists and the United Nations Environment Programme and others have been trying to do in the last year or so, and which will culminate in a big report later this year before the Convention on Biological Diversity meeting in Nagoya, Japan, is this thing called the Economics of Ecosystems and Biodiversity, TEEB. And in a sense, what the world is trying to do here is to bring some of the numbers to the table. There have often been numbers connected with the economic valuation of biodiversity, but in a sense, nobody really quite has believed them or has been a bit suspicious, has doubted them. And this exercise, involving experts from all over the globe, is trying to bring some kind of reality to the economic figures. And you can probably see it in your program there, but I mean, basically, the estimate is that we are losing between $2 trillion and $4.5 trillion worth of services provided by nature every year, provided by this ecological infrastructure of forests and fresh waters and soils, that we're losing this every year. And of course, if you imagine that, this is far bigger than the financial and economic crisis, which we were told was the biggest recession since, well, the last big recession, which was sort of roughly in the 1930s. So why are we not responding to this? Is it because we don't believe the economics? Is it because we have the economics now, but we haven't quite persuaded business and industry? And if these economics are indeed true, what do we do about it in terms of actually reversing this trend, in terms of bringing the market to bear on this biodiversity and ecosystem service crisis? So I'm trying to set up the debate a little bit here, and maybe I can come over. Perhaps maybe I can ask you, Ashok. I mean, why are we not responding to the challenge of biodiversity and ecosystem loss? Why is it that the markets don't seem to capture the true value of these natural assets? And is business aware of what they're doing to the natural assets? And is it responding? And what does it need to do more?
We've said over and over again over the last 2 days that the pricing of resources is invisible because we don't charge for it. So when we use water and air and minerals from the ground, a large part of the real costs to nature and to society of those are buried by just assuming them away. Of course, they do get paid, but they get paid by someone else. You know, there's an old saying that you can't make an omelet without breaking eggs. Well, some people are getting the omelet, but other people's eggs are getting broken. And therefore, they don't always notice what is actually the consequence. The title of your session here, Nick, is The Role of Business. But there are two-way roles. The role of nature and biodiversity in business, and there is the role of business as it impacts biodiversity. And I think we need to separate those and look at them very carefully in terms of their implications for our future. I don't think anybody in this room would deny, otherwise probably it wouldn't be here, that we depend for almost everything in our lives on nature. And, you know, we use these rather complex words like biodiversity. The biological diversity of our planet is really needs to be broken down. We need to understand what does that mean. It certainly means species, which is what most of us conjure up in our minds when we think of biodiversity. But it also means habitats, places where things happen. Could be forests, could be deserts, could be waterways, whatever. And it means ecological processes. Biodiversity is about all three things. And we don't ever really think about this, much about the second and at all about the third. Almost every business depends on one aspect or another. There's virtually no business I can think of. Now, it's true that by the end of the quarter, the results of what impacts we've had on biodiversity may not show up. So if a CEO is worried simply about getting the shareholders to vote for him or her, that's probably not going to be a driving force in terms of their decision-making. But during the course of the tenure of a CEO, maybe 20 quarters, maybe 5 years, it does have an impact. And it has a huge impact for industries that depend actually on raw materials, that actually have to extract things from the earth, whether they're non-renewable, like minerals or fossil fuels, or they're renewables, like wood or water or whatever. It already begins to show up quite quickly, within a matter of years, what happens to the biosphere that you're doing. But there is no, but there are other industries, and you may well say, well, what difference does it make to Bill Gates or to Google? Let's say Google, which is a perfectly well-known and simple service industry. And you may well say, well, what difference does it make to Google that there's no biodiversity? Well, I can tell you a hell of a lot, because Google is one of the largest users of energy and materials there is, because their server farms are really about as big as any company in the industry. They use up so much energy that it's the equivalent of some small countries around the world. Their server farms are huge consumers of materials and energy. Some very precious materials, scarce rare earth materials. Now, all of these have a huge impact on the living biosphere too. So there's no one, not the most remotely saintly recluse in the top of the mountain who doesn't have an impact on biodiversity, and vice versa. Biodiversity of all kinds has an impact, and you quoted the question of pollinators, which is an incredibly important one. If human beings were to pollinate the crops around the world that nature does, all these things that begin with B, beetles and butterflies and bees and bats and everything else, they're doing work of literally trillions of dollars for you.